Hello all my subscribers across the Midwest. This is the Blue Water Outlook weekly water briefing for April 7th, 2013. Here's the big picture as far as rainfall over the last 7 days, and snow I should say. Across the Midwest, you can see most of the Midwest received at least some precipitation, but the light blue is very minor amounts, so you really have to get into the green before it becomes significant, a ½ inch or more. Now that green over parts of Wisconsin and Minnesota was in the form of snow, so there was some significant snow around the Great Lakes region. But elsewhere across the Midwest, being in the northerly branch of the jet stream, it was a fairly quiet week with only light precipitation. So if we look at the percent of normal for the last 7 days, we do see this very broad area of red, and that's well below normal rainfall. The areas of above normal in blue are far and few between. So last week was definitely a very quiet week as far as precipitation across the entire Midwest. Now I mentioned there was some snow. The maroon here is very light amounts, an inch or so. The more significant amounts were the yellows and greens associated with flow off the lakes regions. You can see it downstream from the lakes, and that's where the lake effect snow was enhanced. Otherwise, not even much snow over the last week. The snowpack is still confined to a small area. The maroon is fairly significant here. That's 3 inches or more. And the point I want to make, I've been making this for a number of weeks now, if not a month or so, is that it's really remained very much confined throughout the entire winter. It has not extended further south. This is all snow-free. Thus, I think from a snowmelt perspective this spring, there could be a couple rivers, especially the Red River and rivers in northeast Minnesota, or northern Minnesota and northeast North Dakota, that could get some significant flooding, but it's going to be confined. There's just not enough snow cover across the upper Midwest to give widespread flooding this season. Now, I did want to mention here, or show here, the progression of the snow cover, and that's the red line. This area here to the left of this line, this is past, so we've sort of been pretty steady. Hasn't been changing one way or the other, but you can sort of see over the next week it is forecast to increase a bit from roughly about 15% up to about 30%. I'll talk about that in just a minute. So the big picture across the Midwest is definitely haves and have-nots. The western part of the region, especially Nebraska, South Dakota, Kansas, and western Iowa, is very, very dry with significant soil moisture anomalies. On the eastern area, a pattern that has developed in fall from eastern Missouri, Illinois, parts of Indiana and Ohio are much more significantly impacted beneficially by upper soil moisture due to more recent rain. So that area is in the normal range. So we really see that dividing line. It's been there for quite some time since last fall, and it's still there with areas west here are very dry. Areas east are either in normal conditions or even a tad bit on the moist side. Taking a quick look at rivers here, sort of a mix mash here. This is a 7-day average stream flow. I did want to mention that rivers over the middle part of the nation are still quite low. Rivers over the eastern part of the Midwest are generally in the normal range. So last week I mentioned that Arctic Oscillation, which has been negative for a very long time, was forecast to move positive. This was the recent record negative Arctic Oscillation. Came very close to a neutral pattern, and then it dipped down again, and now it's beginning to move up again. This was not forecast, this little area here, so all it's really doing is delaying this phase change for about 3 or 4 days. But we are still in this process of going from this negative, persistently negative Arctic Oscillation to a positive Arctic Oscillation by the middle of the month. So here's the big picture. Blue is the jet stream pattern early this week. Yellow is later this week. So the story this week, and it's really going to just be one story this week, will be this area of energy here, and I've shaded it in yellow. This area of energy is going to eject out. It's going to eject out in two little parts. One part will be a northeast part, that's right here, and then the second part will be west to east. And the Midwest is going to be dominated by the stronger of these two pulses of energy, the northeast pulse, and that's going to bring some significant rain and snow across parts of the Midwest this week. Now, by late this week, we're getting into this jet stream, a zonal flow or west to east, and that's that typical neutral or positive Arctic oscillation, and that's a quieter pattern. But again, as I'll be showing, if there is some precipitation, that's going to be in the upper Midwest more than the southern U.S. Now, this time of year, we start to try to bring moisture up into the region. I wanted to show that it's making it up into Oklahoma and parts of Arkansas, maybe even Missouri. And as we begin to tap that moisture further and further north, the potential for heavier thunderstorms will increase. But right now, it's not getting too much past Oklahoma and southern Missouri, the most deep-seated moisture. But I'll keep an eye on that because that is that spring transition. So the rainfall forecast and snow forecast this week, pretty active week over parts of the Midwest. Heavy rain along that upper jet stream, that pulse of energy that comes out with heavy rain over maybe in the 1 to 3 inch range from parts of far eastern Kansas, parts of Missouri, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, parts of Michigan as well. And then heavy snow. I showed you that band of snow that would be expanding. It does look like there will be some snow over parts of Nebraska, western Nebraska, and North Dakota and South Dakota. So all these areas can use some rain. The areas that can use the most rain are probably not going to get the most, but still it's going to be welcome in that area. There could be some scattered flooding problems with that area of very heavy rain, but I think they will be fairly scattered because the overall picture is that soil moisture is still needed in that region. Now, I thought I'd look out a little bit further ahead. This is week 1 on the top, week 2 on the bottom. Week 1 shows that wet spell over the Midwest. Interesting to see week 2. Now, week 2 is also showing some wet weather. It's going to be shifting north of the jet stream, so as the north jet stream pushes north, and it might be over an area that needs it over parts of North Dakota. It might be areas over sort of wet over Minnesota, and that might brush into parts of Iowa and South Dakota and Nebraska as well. It's hard to say where that dividing line will be, but right now it does look like there's going to be a fairly abrupt dividing line between areas that are significantly wet and significantly dry for week 2. So soil moisture changes over the 2-week period show that almost all of the Midwest is expected to see improvements of soil moisture over the next couple weeks. The areas, the darker shade of blue, are the more significant increases in soil moisture. And as we get into the southern part of the U.S., it's more dry. So that's going to be the trend both this week and next week. It looks like this week, most likely the heaviest rain will be over the southern tier right in here. Next week, it could be further north in this region. So it does look like 2 weeks of fairly active weather over parts of the Midwest, not the entire Midwest, but definitely parts of the Midwest that will continue to recharge soil moisture to some degree. Takeaway points for this week's briefing: 2 areas of activity, one to the south, one over the Midwest. Midwest will be active with some welcome snow and rain over western parts of the Midwest. With the developing positive Arctic oscillation, we eventually will go into a zonal flow from west to east that should shift the precipitation trends and patterns further to the north over the upper Midwest on week 2. Thank you for listening to this week's briefing. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at john@bluewateroutlook.com. I'll be talking to you again next week. Thank you for listening.